Okay, cool. Good morning, everyone. It's very exciting to be here. I've come all the way from Australia to this conference, which has been very exciting to come so far to a new place as well. My name is Zach Fitz. I am a PhD student. I'm going to be presenting to you today on designing gamification for a learner logbook smartphone application. I am located in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, at the Queensland University of Technology. That's me there. It's an earlier photo. And I am a PhD student at the Mobile Innovation Lab of QUT, and my research is partly funded by the Smart Services Cooperative Research Centre as well. So they kind of link industry to research. And in my spare time, I'm actually a driver trainer. I'm not an accredited one, I just help to supervise my younger brother, who's currently learning to drive. We get to practice all the fun things, such as reversing and reverse parallel parks and fearing for my life. Seems to be something which happens a little bit as well. But it's interesting, things have changed quite a bit since I had to get my license. So as of 2007 in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, learners undergo a 4-step process in terms of getting their license. So they start off by getting a learner's license, which allows them to drive with a supervisor. So that's anyone who has a license. Once they pass a practical exam, they get their red provisional license. So they kind of level up almost. And here they have certain restrictions. So they have their red provisional license for 2 years. And then after 2 years, they get their green provisional license, which have lesser limitations and restrictions. And then finally, they get their open license, which means they can drive freely whenever and wherever they want. So it's kind of a little bit like there's game elements in there already with leveling up and unlocking things. But the most important part of the learner stage is that learners are required to undertake 100 hours of supervised practice. So this is mandatory for all learner drivers. They need to undertake this amount of practice, and they need to submit this before they can actually go for their practical driver's license test. And this is because young drivers, in particular drivers aged 17 to 24-year-olds, are at a much higher risk of death and injury from road crashes due to their age and their inexperience on the road. And so much so that, in 2011, 21.9% of crash fatalities involved 17 to 25-year-olds, even though they only made up 12.9% of Australia's population. And this is because as soon as they get behind the wheel by themselves, they're at a much greater risk because they're experiencing things on the roads that they might not be familiar with or situations that they may not have been in before. So there's been research into the effectiveness of the 100 hours, and this is why it was introduced, to encourage more experience. But the 100 hours is just a number. It doesn't necessarily mean that once you reach 100 hours, you're an excellent driver. And it doesn't necessarily mean that learner drivers are undertaking a wide range of different types of practice. So they could just be driving from school and back every day, when we want them to go out and encourage them to drive in a wide range of different contexts, such as, if you're in Canada, driving in snow, driving on ice, in Australia, driving in the outback, I guess, or, driving when it's raining, when it's dark, different types of contexts. On top of that, this is the learner logbook here, so they're given this at the start of their learner stage, and they have to fill out every single time they go for a practice. So this includes filling out up to 14 different fields by pencil, manually every single time, including things like location, odometer, driving supervisor. It goes on to include things like start time, end time. They do a little bit of maths as well, calculate it up. It's interesting. Some learners have reported that for short trips, they won't even fill this out, or they'll just make it up later as well. So there's a problem here with the tool. It can also get lost, and taking it from car to car can be quite difficult. So we've got an opportunity here to look at how we could make a mobile application in order to make the logging process a little bit easier. And also, basically because smartphones and mobile apps are easier to track practice because they go where the learner goes. They can utilize sensors on the smartphone to automate and verify logging. We can make recommendations and give them feedback based off the data. And we can provide extra features such as road rules, find a nearby instructor. And it saves on administration costs as well. So someone has to go through this logbook manually and check that the data that they've entered is correct before they get it back. There's also an opportunity for gamification because previous research has suggested that if we add game elements or look at using game elements in these non-game contexts, we can encourage and engage people to undertake various behaviors, basically. So we're interested in 3 particular behaviors. We're looking at encouraging regular practice for learner drivers, so to undertake it on a regular basis, to undertake a wide range of different types of practice, and also to practice beyond the 100 hours. So we want them practicing as much as possible because when they're being supervised, it's the safest period of time for them when they're on the road. Cool. There's been a little bit of work in the area of games and driving before. So the speed camera lottery is fantastic. It's basically encouraging people not to speed. For those who speed, they pay a fine, and those who don't speed, they can win money from the people who paid the fine. So I think it's in Sweden. It's a fantastic use of game elements to encourage particular driving behavior. There's also Nissan Leaf, which aims to encourage sustainable driving habits by using game elements and by tracking people's driving habits in the car as well. So a couple of examples. There's also the Queensland government has released Road Trip the Game, which basically is a web browser game which teaches learners about particular road rules and safety advice and things like that. However, there's nothing that really intersects these three particular areas of learner drivers using smartphones to log their practice and also the area of gamification. So this is kind of where my research sits. So how did we go about designing this experience? We used an iterative, user-centered design approach, drawing upon game design techniques, as well as looking at how we could develop apps using kind of regular processes. So we used things like, we did a review of literature and apps that were currently available. We undertook interviews with experts in the area of learner drivers, feedback sessions with learners, with app designers and game designers as well. We undertook usability and playability testing, which I'm going to be focusing on today. And we also did a field study with learner drivers, so 25 learner drivers going out and actually using the app in the field. So the interviews with experts in the field of learner drivers. So these were 5 experts who were either key in contributing to the design of the learner program or had studied extensively learners, so had interviewed kind of hundreds of learners and the particular habits which they have. So we discussed learners in general, some of the challenges they face, the Queensland licensing program, and the current logbook process, and looking at opportunities for a gamified app. We came up with a list of 8 design requirements for the application. These were quite general, some of them. So for example, replicating all the functionality that this physical logbook provides. But we had some interesting design challenges as well, which included, for example, don't encourage excessive competition with the game elements that we have, because we don't want to encourage them to undertake risky driving behavior. So we have to be really careful in the way in which we design the game elements to kind of encourage particular behaviors but not encourage others. And also there is a ban on all mobile phone usage in the car, which makes it a little bit difficult to create a game in that particular context. So we had to think about making a game which would fit into that particular area. So we came up with an app. This is it here. This is just demonstrate the base functionality to begin with. It is a logbook app. You can see an overview of the practice that you've undertaken. Once you get into the car, you simply, before you turn on the engine, you simply start the application and start recording by entering your odometer. Then you give it to your supervisor or put it away, and it records your practice. At the end of the trip, you press stop. It enters all of this information for you automatically after you've entered things like the odometer and your supervisor. But it grabs things like location automatically, the time of day, the weather, and we'll use the sensors on the smartphone to input that just to make it easier. And then learners can also tick off particular skills they tried, things they need to work on next time, and also areas which they drove in. And this is key for then how we powered the game elements after. So I've developed a couple of gamified apps, and we've developed a gamification design framework, which is based around 4 steps. The first one is to identify gamification goals and turn these into metrics that can be measured, so we can know or basically enforce these goals. We want to really understand the type of player that we have as well, who we're designing for. Once we've got these 2 elements, we can then go about designing the gamification experience. And finally, we then obtain feedback and we iterate, so using an iterative kind of design process. So gamification goals and metrics. We took 3 of the design requirements that we had and we turned them into metrics that we could actually measure. So one of them was to encourage regular practice. So we wanted them to practice at least 2 hours a week. We wanted them to complete more than 100 hours, so we could measure when they had completed 105, 110 hours, etc. And we wanted them to undertake and master various driving skills and contexts, so they could tick these off. So these were the goals, turned into metrics. The players were 16 to 24-year-olds, male and female, tech-savvy, beginning to learn to drive, and had a range of game likes and interests, which is a very broad group to design for. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So what we did was we created a virtual road trip around Australia where learners drive, or as they drive, they receive coins, and these coins can be used to purchase fuel and other items for their road trip. So they start in Brisbane and they have to make their way all around Australia. By the time they reach kind of the end licensing period. So they could basically pick a car, they had different attributes, and they could pick a destination, and then they undertook their road trip around Australia. So whenever they went to record practice, they would record the practice, check off the different items that they were doing, and then they would receive coins in the form of, well, basically for the amount of time which they practiced, the skills that they undertook, the particular context, and if they practiced regularly. And then they could use these coins to basically purchase fuel and other items for their cars, things to keep their passengers happy as well, so like CDs and stuff. And they could also then progress around Australia. We undertook a user study with recruited 12 drivers to trial the two versions of the Logbook application. We have a gamified version and a non-gamified version, so without the road trip. We were looking at comparing, in particular, preference and user experience between the two apps, and also evaluating the subjective playability and potential motivation of the gamified app. So we ran 45-minute laboratory sessions with these two versions, and basically did a number of tasks emulating as if they were in the actual car as well. We recorded interactions, completed a questionnaire, and an interview was undertaken. Then we repeated this for the second app as well. In terms of data, we gathered a range of different aspects about user experience and also preference between the applications and compared to the logbook. And also we looked at measuring the playability of the gamified version as well in terms of enjoyment, likes, dislikes, and improvements. So in terms of results, we found out it was a rather small sample size, so only 12 participants, but learnability was one of the issues that arose. So we found that the only real big difference in terms of user experience was that the gamified version was a little bit harder to learn to use. And that's because, I guess it's obvious, we had these extra elements on top of it, which involved having to learn about it. But it's interesting, we had a bit of an introduction as well, something which people could read to learn about the game. Most people skipped through it. They're like, yeah, next, 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 I just want to get into the app. So, I mean, it happens a lot, doesn't it? And so it was ignored, and they were more exploratory in their approach to clicking things, seeing what was interactive, what wasn't. Participants preferred both apps to this physical logbook, but what was interesting was that neither versions of the app were significantly preferred over the other. More did select, actually, the non-gamified version, which was interesting, in particular because the gamified logbook was reported as being more enjoyable and more motivating as well. We had positive reactions to the game elements, so participants said that some of the participants reported that it added fun to a somewhat serious task, saying, I didn't feel like I was just inputting data, but I was receiving something for the work I was putting in. And some found it motivating as well, or saying it would encourage more frequent drives. We did have some negative reactions. Two guys did not like the application at all. They just reported that the game elements were underwhelming and unnecessary. They said things like the actual game seems a little underwhelming, and this was possibly because when we use the word game as well to describe a particular application, people go in with, these pre-notions of this is going to be a game, like a fully fledged game. So you've got to be careful when calling them games in this respect. And some people were like, I just want to record my experience. I don't want to play games at all. So we had some playability issues, so learning, as I said before. Some people got to a point where like, I don't know what to do from here. One person had difficulty discerning between the game and the functions of the app. They're like, so I have to drive all the way around Australia to finish this? So there's, it's interesting kind of trying to align the goals of the game and to get it across as well. And there's a potential for game elements to lead to cheating. So in terms of suggested improvements, they want a better introduction. Some people want achievements as well, competitive and social game elements, and less of a focus on gamification. So in terms of kind of wrapping this up in terms of suggestions that you could use for your gamification designs, they weren't necessarily preferred over the non-gamified version, and this could have been because of learnability issues and things like that. So we suggest that gamification shouldn't come at the cost of utility and usability. The second one is in terms of learnability. So we suggest that an interactive tutorial be included for more complex gamification designs rather than just having kind of an introductory screen. In terms of players, one size does not fit all. So if you're finding that it's difficult to design for a large cohort, you may want to focus on a subset of players. And cheating, adding game elements may encourage cheating. It can be difficult to handle cheating, and it's either best to enforce these more or just remove the game elements that could be explored. So we took all this, we went back and we reiterated the design and came up with a more streamlined game, and are testing this now. I'm looking forward to the analysis when I get back next week, so that should be fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much.